It's 10 o'clock. Good morning, I'm Rachel Silver. LBC 97.3's uncovered evidence Met police officers are being forced to sleep under tables, in locker rooms and in fast food restaurants between their shifts. The drastic measures are being taken by officers to get to work on time to police the Jubilee and the Olympics. Here's our political editor, Tom Cheel.
Officers I've spoken to say they're among hundreds who've had to sleep in stations and other buildings between shifts. While the problem was acute during the riots, it's continued this year as the Queen's Jubilee, Olympics and Paralympic Games continue to stretch resources. Many say their existing 12-hour shift patterns often aren't flexible enough to let them respond to incidents, get home and rest, then return for their next shift. And the problem's made worse by the growing number of officers living outside London. According to figures obtained by LBC 97.3, only 4 in 10 now live and work in our city.
More on this coming up next with Ian Dale.
And I am indeed joined by Karen Buck, who is not looking as nervous as most MPs do when they have the prospect of the quiz. Not yet. And the Vice Chair of the Metropolitan Police Federation, John Tully. Good afternoon to you both. Now, the question I want to debate in this half hour of the programme is, should we pay more council tax to help out our overstretched police force? And who would want to be a police officer in 2012? 0845 6060 973. And I ask this in light of the facts uncovered by our exclusive LBC 97.3 investigation, which we were discussing earlier in the programme. And if you weren't listening then, just to recap, according to figures obtained by LBC, only 4 in 10 serving officers now live in a London borough, as increasingly they're forced to move out by the high cost of housing in London and the removal of rent allowances and station houses, which used to provide relatively low cost accommodation to police stations. And we found that police officers are routinely sleeping on camp beds or in cupboards or under the table or even in McDonald's. Morale is very low and resignations are on the increase. But what can we do about it? John Tully, it's a very bleak picture. Are things really that bad?
It is a bleak picture. I think it's driven by the government's insistence on the 20% cuts to police budgets, and we acknowledge that they're here to stay, those cuts. I think what the Federation's role in that is to negotiate as strongly as we can with government, the Mayor's office and senior management in the police service to make sure we get the best deal for the rank and file officers. A lot of what you said from your report rings true with me. Certainly during the Queen's Jubilee celebrations, we had officers sleeping on police station floors because they had long periods of duty and very short periods of time between those periods of duty. So a lot of that rings true. Morale is rock bottom. I've never known it as low as this. I've now got about 26 years service. It just beggars belief that the government expect the reducing number of police officers to do more for less.
Because there is going to be a big question mark over the number of officers that are going to be left, particularly the Metropolitan Police Force. Boris Johnson said to me at last year's Conservative Party conference, I guarantee that there will be 32,000 officers or thereabouts during the course of my second term of office. If the number of officers that are leaving has doubled over the last few months and that trend continues, he's not going to be able to keep to that pledge, is he?
It's ironic that coming up to just prior to the mayoral elections this year, there was an injection of cash from the Mayor's office to the Met Police Service, which maintained those numbers to the figures that he was mentioning. In fact, the Met peaked at just over 33,000 in November of 2009, and there's been a steady decline since then. I think currently we're just over 31,500, so that's now with their July figures. So we can see even since the election, the 32,000 promise has been forgotten. I think the Mayor has got a lot to answer for. He maintains that he wants to be involved in policing, yet he has devolved the PCC role, the Policing and Crime Commissioner role, to an unelected Deputy Mayor, Stephen Greenhalgh, who we've yet to meet as a police federation, and it'd be interesting to hear what his views are.
Well, we'll be talking to him a little bit later. You're seriously telling me that in the, 4-5 months that he's been in office, he hasn't once sat down with you?
Mr Greenhalgh has consistently, or his office, have consistently battered off our requests to meet him, stating that he's too busy.
What do you put that down to?
I really don't know. I wouldn't like to speculate as to his reasons, but he clearly isn't interested in speaking to the representatives of the rank and file officers of London.
Karen Buck, when you talk to police officers in your constituency, how do you find their morale?
I think the morale is very poor. I mean, the people I have most dealings with are the Safer Neighbourhood police teams, and I think Safer Neighbourhood policing was an absolute triumph. I mean, it changed in the sort of 20 years or so that I've been kind of around in public life. It changed the profile of policing. I thought it was a really successful model. And what we've seen in the last year, and we've seen it accelerating, is those teams are kind of close to being phantom teams on occasions. The number of sergeants in Safer Neighbourhood teams was halved last year, which I think was very unfortunate, because the leadership is incredibly important in terms of community work. But now you'll find on the teams that, sometimes they're supposed to be a basic model of 6 PCSOs and police officers, and quite frequently you'll find there's only 1 or 2 on duty, and it's not their fault, but that model seems to be really kind of disappearing under us.
If you were talking to recruits or potential recruits to the Metropolitan Police Service, and you get all of this talk about retrenchment, about working conditions, cuts and all the rest of it, why would anyone want to go into the Metropolitan Police in 2012?
Oh, I mean, I think policing is such an important part of our capital, and I think we're very, very fortunate. I mean, there are plenty of examples where policing doesn't work as well as it should, but overall I think we're blessed by our police, and I think the Safer Neighbourhood policing is very good. Thank goodness we do not have as a routine armed police on the streets. I think that the relationship between the police and the public is generally good, and it's a vitally important role. I mean, where would we be without having high quality policing out there? So I would encourage people to do it despite this. I think that there is an issue that some of the changes in police pay and conditions, which may have been inevitable, in any under any government, as longevity increases, people are having to pay more pension contributions, people are having to work longer. But the fact that that's happening at exactly the same time when the crunch is coming in terms of basic funding and training, and the housing crisis that you talked about as well, I think is one of the reasons that people are finding it such a stretch. But I mean, some of those things would be happening anyway. I would strongly recommend people to do it, but I also think it's absolutely right that police are making their case, both as workers, which they have a right to do, but also making the case about where they see the delivery of quality policing being undermined.
John Tully, are you finding that recruitment is becoming increasingly difficult in the Metropolitan Police?
I wouldn't say so, because significantly about 2 years ago, perhaps 18 months, the Met Police Authority, as it was, made a decision on advice from the MPS that the main route of recruitment would be through the Metropolitan Police Special Constabulary and the PCSO service, with a very small number of people coming in from, say, graduate entry schemes or other areas of life that were prohibited from being special constables. So we have a ready-made pool of people who are actually knocking at the door to become police officers, and it's good that we have those people. But I think significantly what we're concerned about as a federation is the way that those people are trained and the outcome, and it's a bit of a strange way to look at it, but the product that comes out of that training system I think needs to be looked at. We've dramatically reduced the time that they spend in training, and again that's cost driven. Everything we do in the police service these days seems to be trying to save money rather than look at what the best way to do something is.
Well, I suppose some people in other sectors might say, well, welcome to the real world. That's what we have to cope with. Why should you be any different?
I accept that, but when you think that as a police officer you make life and death decisions and split-second decisions which could impact upon members of the public's lives forever, and indeed their own lives, because you make a mistake, you make the wrong decision, which is then scrutinised under a microscope with a great deal of time and experienced barristers looking at what you actually did. We need the people who are going to be police officers to be properly trained, to be the right calibre of people to take us forward.
Let's take a couple of your texts and emails. This is from a police officer who wants to remain anonymous. Many of us do not get a rest break due to the high number of calls you have to do as a response officer. There are officers just this week that have had to do a night duty which finishes at 7 a.m. They then have to be in court the same day at 10 a.m. Having spoken to the duties regarding this, they've either told us to get tough or to use one of our annual leave rest days to cover it. It won't be long before a serious incident occurs, but management don't care. They're fiddling the numbers to prove the system works because they're just as scared of losing their job as we are. I mean, I guess that's a reference to the 12-hour shift system, which a lot of police officers like, because it means you've 4 days off and then 4 days on, 3 days off, presumably. So, in a sense, you can't have it both ways, can you? Because if you want to have the 3 days off, you've got to accept that there will be times when you're going to be working longer hours in between.
I accept that, and when I joined the service, we did 8-hour shifts, so we did quick changeovers, so we finished at 10, we're back in at 6, etc. But times have moved on, and we do now have 12-hour shifts, and a lot of the officers do like those. What I would say is, though, that management sometimes take advantage of the regulations. For instance, in the last 9 months, approximately, perhaps nearly a year now, over 500,000 rest days have been cancelled to facilitate the policing of London. There are still over 160,000 of those rest days outstanding. We have, as you mentioned earlier, people sleeping on police station floors because they don't have enough time to go home between shifts. Someone needs to wake up and realise that, as your texter said, something will go drastically wrong, something will break, and someone will get badly hurt.
Well, we're talking to John Tully, Vice Chair of the Metropolitan Police Federation, and Karen Buck, Labour MP for Westminster North. We're talking about the police, and we're asking the question, why would anyone want to be a police officer in 2012? This follows our discovery here on LBC 97.3 today that police officers are routinely sleeping in cupboards, under tables, because of their shift patterns. 4 in 10 don't live in London any longer. And the number of police officers leaving the service has doubled over the past few months. So it paints a fairly bleak picture of life in the Metropolitan Police at the moment. Well, we're joined on the line by Stephen Greenhalgh, Deputy Mayor for Policing. Stephen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Now, can I first of all get your reaction to what we've been talking about on the programme, about the working conditions that many police officers are working under, and the fact that so many more police officers seem to be leaving the service?
Well, I'm shocked to hear those experiences. I'm obviously well aware that the Metropolitan Police have been under intense pressure this summer. It's been a unique summer. We've had the Olympics, which has been the largest ever peacetime policing operation, which have gone brilliantly. I mean, the focus has obviously been on sport. There's been no repeat of the riots, no repeat of the atrocities that blighted Munich 40 years ago, and actually crime has been coming down in London by 5%. So to hear the kind of pressure that has been uncovered in your programme, but I've also known that many police officers have given up their vacations, have got up really early, worked extraordinary hours. I thank them personally myself. And we've got to provide good working conditions, both where they work and that they're able to get to and from work easily.
Now, I'm told you haven't actually sat down and talked to the Metropolitan Police Federation over the past 4 months since you've been in your post. Perhaps if you had done that, you would have heard some of these stories before hearing them on the radio this morning.
Well, I've heard that criticism. I'm not aware that they've made a formal request to see me, Ian. But equally, I put out a call to Paul McKeever and had an introduction through a mutual acquaintance and was unable to get hold of him. But I'm very keen to meet the Metropolitan Police Federation, certainly not shy in coming forward. I actually took up the post in June, obviously have spent some time just getting to learn the job, and will be seeing and meeting representatives of the Police Federation, obviously have met frontline police officers as well as people serving at all ranks within the Metropolitan Police Service.
Let's look at police numbers, because I think that seems to be the political hot potato, and it certainly was in the mayoral election. Now, Boris Johnson made a promise on my programme when I was talking to him at the Conservative Party conference last year that in his second term, numbers would not drop below the levels that they were then, which is around 32,000. Now, how are you going to be able to keep that promise? I mean, I assume that still stands. How are you going to keep that promise if the numbers of police officers leaving grow in the scales that they have over the past few months?
Well, obviously we have to retain police officers, and I look into the attrition rate, whether that's a long-standing or only just in recent months. But there are ways of being able to maintain police numbers with reducing budgets. First of all, you've got to look at reducing overhead and cutting waste. It's fair to say that £1 of what the Met receives in funding from the government and also from the mayoral precept is spent before it gets to the thin blue line. The Met has one of the highest costs on back office and supports. It has the highest cost as a proportion of its expenditure on the back office and support services. So we're going to have to do quite a lot to reduce that. Secondly, the Met owns, a lot of investment properties that don't return any investment at all. In fact, there's a negative return. And there are assets and buildings that, frankly, are not in a fit condition, but equally far too many buildings that are not required operationally that can be released. So a smaller but more efficient estate will cost less to run, probably saving about £50 million a year. So we need to release those underutilised assets. And lastly, we do need to look at the way we can reform the policing model, because the number of managers and supervisors to police constables is very high, and I know that the Met are looking to change that so that we do have more police constables and less supervisors and managers. What do
you make of the fact that 4 in 10 Metropolitan Police officers live in Greater London and 6 in 10 have moved out? Now, I would have thought that you get a better standard of policing if somebody is policing the boroughs that either they live in or neighbouring boroughs.
Well, I completely agree with that. I mean, as you know, I've been a council leader for 6 years, a councillor for 16 and a half years, and frankly, we should be able to house more police officers in London. I mean, 1 in every 4 homes in the capital are subsidised by the taxpayer. Councils should have lettings policies similar to my own borough, Hammersmith Fulham, where I was council leader, where you prioritise working professionals like the police into public housing, and we should be able to house more, frankly.
Why would anyone want to become a police officer in London at the moment?
Well, it is a career, it is a vocation. I'm the grandson of someone who's a police constable in Manchester. I'm the son of someone who became a surgeon, and first and foremost is driven by a desire to serve the public and to be a professional and catch criminals. And if that is your vocation, there's no better place than the oldest police service in the world. Now, what we've got to do is work with the police commissioner to ensure that he has the resources necessary to keep the capital safe and make it safer, and provide working environment that is attractive to police officers in the 21st century. Now, that's not just where they live, but also their working conditions. And it's fair to say that we need a smaller, leaner estate that is, up to scratch.
Now, can you promise here and now that you will be able to find the £750 million of savings without any cuts to the overall number of officers, whether it be frontline or back office?
I'm certainly going to reform the back office, and that goes without saying. So I will look at ways of reducing the amount we spend before it gets to the front line. At the moment, 642 police officers are sitting in the back office, and around 4,700 are sitting in the back and middle office. And I think more police officers need to be at the front line. So I will be looking at back office reform and reducing back office costs. I will look at rationalising the estate and cutting the running costs of that, and I will work with a Met to see whether a new policing model can reduce the level of supervision and management. That said, I'm well aware of the Mayor's commitments, and I will do all I can to reduce overhead and waste, release assets, and reform the way that policing is delivered in the capital before we look at cutting overall police numbers.
Under your watch, police numbers, frontline police numbers, 32,000 officers, it's not going to go down.
Well, 32,000 officers, as I've just said, Ian, are not at the front line. There's about nearly 5,000 of them are in the front and middle office. What I've said is that we will make sure, certainly, that we take out costs away from the front line and that we reduce expenditure in ways that don't have an impact on police numbers.
Well, with respect, that sounds like a caveat from Boris Johnson's promise last year.
Well, I'm not making promises I can't keep, Ian. I will look at all
So Boris
avenues.
was?
Well, at the moment, I'm on this programme here and now. Boris raises £695 million from the precept. The Met spends £2.6 billion each year of taxpayers' money. So Boris is responsible for and the Mayor is responsible for raising around £700 million. He has pledged and done his bit to freeze the precept over this term. So he is not cutting the resources available to the Met. We are beholden to a review from the Home Office, and I don't know what that will look like, Ian, so I'm not going to look into a crystal ball and guarantee something I can't deliver. And at this stage, I've said there are ways of taking cost out that don't reduce police numbers. I will look at all of those ways, driving out all of the inefficiencies that we see today, reducing the extraordinary cost that's spent on IT, a contract that was supposed to cost 500 million over 10 years and costing well over $1 billion.
Okay.
We will look at to reduce procurement costs, and we look take out costs sensibly before cutting overall police numbers.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed for joining us this lunchtime here on LBC 97.3. That was Stephen Greenhalgh, Deputy Mayor for Policing. John Tully, Chairman or Chair of the Metropolitan Police Federation. I'm promoting you because I gather you have been promoted. What's your reaction to that?
Promotion in the field is always good.
Indeed. One day they'll promote me, you know.
I'm very disappointed to hear from the Deputy Mayor that he thinks he hasn't had a formal approach from the Met Police Federation to actually meet him, because we certainly have made that approach on more than one occasion. So I look forward on Tuesday to having an appointment in my diary, no doubt.
And you let us know if you don't get it as well.
I absolutely will.
What about this issue on police numbers? Because it did seem to me towards the end of the interview there that he was caveating what Boris had said last year.
I think he's in a very difficult place. He talks about the back and middle office, and really they're not defined. There are some roles in the back and middle office which need policing skills. So we need some really intrusive work done on that before actual decisions are made. Yes, some savings can be made across the estate. We've seen police stations being closed, front offices closed and sold off. And over years, we've lost pretty much all of our accommodation for police officers within London. We had police section houses, we had police married quarters. They've all but disappeared. Fortunately, I still live in London. I live in the London Borough of Havering and have done for all of my service virtually. So it is important that officers live in London if they possibly can.
Karen Buck, a very quick word from you in reaction to that interview. I mean, this promise on police numbers that Boris made, I mean, all politicians make promises during elections, but it does look as if it might well be broken from what he was saying.
It certainly didn't sound as if it was something one could count on. And I mean, I think if it was as easy to make these pain-free savings from the back office and from closing police stations, this would have been done over the last 4 or 5 years. There are going to be some very, very tough decisions ahead on both staffing numbers and on police stations.
Well, it's a subject we will return to again here on LBC 97.3. John Tully, thank you very much, Chair of the Metropolitan Police Federation. Karen, you're going to stay with us to subject yourself to one of the cruelest things that can happen to a politician, to take my general knowledge test. That'll be coming up at 12:45. In a couple of minutes, we're going to be talking to ITV News political editor Tom Bradby about his new film, Shadow Dancer. This is LBC 97.